In this film, I have a conversation with Caroline Brown about her experience of visiting her parents, both of whom were living with dementia, in care homes. She speaks candidly about the challenges she faced and shares some valuable insights and tips. Caroline has worked in social care services throughout her working life, now as a freelance consultant. She's passionate about supporting people whose voices are not heard, particularly those affected by dementia, and for people approaching end-of-life care. Thank you, Caroline, for joining me. Welcome. We're going to go straight in and start talking about what we're here for today, which is about visiting someone who is living with dementia. It's something I know you have personal experience of. I've got some work experience of, but I really want to get your insight into the difficulties, the emotions around it, and hopefully touch on a few things that maybe we can come up with together about how to make it less distressing for everybody, things to make it easier. So probably makes sense to start off by you just telling me a bit about your experience of visiting your parents who both live with dementia and how that was for you.
Mm-hmm. It was a really difficult experience. It started in 2006 after 3 memory tests. My mum was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My mum ended up moving into 4 different care homes, and I think for lots of people that I've had discussions with, there's no perfect care home except the one that I've built in my head. I know what it looks like, what it smells like, what it doesn't smell like, what staff are like. So it's a huge transition for everybody concerned. It causes angst and stress and worry for everybody. My mum was always a very strong woman. She held the family together, was just an incredible mother and grandmother. But she kind of gave up because she knew there was something wrong. And I've seen that happen so many times for people who end up, for lots of different reasons, having to move into a care home. They not only start to lose part of their memory, but they lose a sense of themselves. They lose everything that was familiar. They lose their home. They lose their relationships. They're expected to move from everything that is familiar. My mum and dad lived in a small retirement house into this big box that was full of rooms and different faces and noises and people. And so it's a huge transition. It's fraught with emotion and it's fraught with the unknown, and you're terrified. Me personally, with this diagnosis, I remember thinking my mum was going to die any day because nobody told me that she wasn't. It was just this diagnosis that just felt fatal for me. So, and again, for many people, my dad was still at home. So I was working full time, bringing my kids up, going from work to visit my dad, to visit my mum in the care home, to come. I was exhausted every which way. So burnout's a big risk for carers. That's another thing. You're given the label of carer.
Yeah.
I never wanted to be a still.
Yes.
I understand the term carer. I understand so many things now, but I just wanted to be their daughter. So yes. Everything changes.
Yeah.
So it's a massive big thing to happen for anybody.
So once your mum had moved into the care home, I suppose then you're not just going to visit your mum at home where you're both familiar and comfortable. You're going to a place where there's paid staff and lots of other people in the same home who have different conditions. And
yeah,
how was that?
I remember in the early days there was it was a nursing home eventually where my mum lived in the specialist dementia unit, and some staff were phenomenal. I still remember them and I will never forget the care they gave to my mum. But there were some staff who I just remember thinking, what are you doing working here? So you're having to get to know another group of people. You're almost pleading with them. You're begging with them silently. Please look after this woman who's my world. And one nurse at that time, I remember, said to me one time when my mum wasn't too well, And this nurse said to me, don't come up for a week because it'll be easier for your mum. And I remember walking out of the care home thinking, am I supposed to believe this woman? How does she know this? But I had hundreds of questions. She didn't have time to answer my questions, and I suspect she wouldn't have known the answers. And I couldn't stay away for a week. And when I went up to see my mum, I thought, am I doing my mum harm? So my mind was full of questions all the time, and I just knew in my heart of hearts. So I think sometimes your gut feeling, you need to go with your gut feeling. Yeah. You're the person's relative, son, daughter, brother, sister, whatever. So I couldn't stay away for the week. And I knew it was the right thing to do, because when my mum saw me, her eyes always lit up. That was my indication. So you struggle sometimes with some strong personalities of staff who think they know better, and sometimes they do, but a lot of the time they don't, but they're struggling themselves. I think it's really helpful as well to identify a member of staff who might be particularly friendly. And actually, I used to begin with 100 questions, I'm sure, and I'm sure some staff would go, here she goes again. So communicate, because I also learned, and I don't know why I had never thought about it, but lots of paid carers are also carers in their private life. And you never know that until you have a conversation. So new relationships can emerge, but if you can ask for a good time to meet and compromise with that, share information. We had a person-centred plan completed for both my parents, and I typed it all up and used pictures, and so it was in my mum and dad's top drawer in their bedroom. And I would encourage people to read that, because they would then find out more information about what was important to my mum and dad. And actually staff members were going, I didn't know that about your mum and dad. So it was easier for them to try to introduce other things for them as well. I think one of the reasons that it's important to visit somebody when they move into a care home, part of that is because so much has changed for them. So by visiting, you're offering some kind of consistency, an emotional consistency, a friendship consistency. My parents, I've said before, their faith was really important. They were at church every single day, so they had a community of people they saw every day. They lived in one authority, and the care home was a mile up the road in a different authority. But once my mum moved into the care home, she never returned to that church. So it was almost like she disappeared. And at that time, I didn't know what to say to people, because I was educating myself at that time via the internet, which they say you shouldn't do. But I was given no information after my mum was diagnosed. So I think it's important to get information.
Absolutely.
Find organisations like Alzheimer's Scotland who can signpost you and offer the correct support to you and your loved one as well.
I think the internet is a valid place to look as well. Obviously, we're going to be being seen on the internet.
Absolutely.
And organisations like Alzheimer's Scotland have amazing resources online that you can look at. And finding out what type of dementia they have, how that might present, because an educated person is much better placed to deal with these things.
And I think the thing to remember though, yes, I think it's really important to receive a diagnosis so that you can, as you say, educate yourself and find out if behaviours do change or manifest in different ways. But always to remember, the diagnosis doesn't define the person. So again, it's getting the balance between both. And essentially what happened, her connections, and ultimately when my dad was then diagnosed with vascular dementia, but he was struggling big time, and his health, became affected because he was still visiting my mum, his wife, every day in this care home. So for all she wasn't 100 miles away, she could very well have been, because nobody went to visit her, because I withdrew because I was trying to cope with my own life, and families can become overwhelmed.
A lot of what we're talking about is around people who have moved into residential settings, but clearly the same advice applies if you're visiting someone in their own home.
Yes.
I mean, particularly in the early stages of dementia, when I think there's sometimes can be a tendency to hear that someone has had a diagnosis, and maybe be slightly afraid of it or slightly unsure and just kind of choose to stay away. but actually that person may still be able to do exactly all the same things that you used to be able to do. And really important to keep that connection going.
And I think actually the fear is more in the person who has received the diagnosis, and actually what they need is for you to be consistent and not stop. Acknowledge your fear to somebody external. When the language that you use is really important as well, not to bombard a person with too many questions, which we can do when we're nervous or anxious. And if the person struggles to answer, we fill that space. But sometimes just to take a deep breath and let there be silence. Give the person time to respond to you in the way that they're able to. So try really hard to maintain that relationship with the person, because you can't buy that stuff.
No, and it's difficult to claw it back later if you've been out of their life for too long.
Totally. And also communicate with people who might visit, so that you don't end up having 5 visitors in the same night.
Yes.
If you can balance that out, and sometimes that can reduce your feelings of guilt.
Yes, and sharing the load.
Totally.
So it's not just you that feels like you've got to do it. If they've got friends that they used to, play golf with once a week, grab them in and tell them, it's really important.
I've met some people who feel guilty because they don't visit loved ones, and I understand that to a degree. But one of the strategies that somebody told me about was, rather than spending a few hours, they felt they should have spent a few hours with their mother in the care home. It was too hard emotionally. And linking in to one of the things that I meant to say before was the quality of the time that you spend with your loved one. Go armoured. Have a list of things that you can do with and for the person. But the thing that I think it was a member of staff told me was, if you go into your mum's room upset, your mum absolutely will probably not be as calm as she can. So I always tried, regardless of what was happening in my life, I used the stairs as a strategy to walk from my world into my mum's world. And I tried to be calm, and it absolutely worked every time.
Lovely. That's a great tip.
So we also had our playlist, as I mentioned, and we took photographs. She loved Coronation Street. She loved the soaps, so I would put them on. I didn't change that. She had her television in her room. So the guilt thing, try not to feel guilty. Try, if you can, to go for 5 minutes and make that a good 5 minutes, rather than a 2 hours where you're sitting crying or watching the person. I observed my mum all the time. I was taking in everything. Is she okay? Is she in pain? So try and make it a good visit. Try and think of things that they used to like doing, because invariably they may still like doing the things they always have done.
And considering time of day too, because sometimes a day might be harder than others, and the staff should be able to give you an indication of that, as to, where your mum's particularly good when she wakes up in the morning or not. And that gives you an idea of when to come along. Brilliant.
And sometimes a singer used to come in who, in my head, I used to think, I hate this, because it's a huge big group and family members looked as if they were struggling. But actually, music definitely can connect people. And this particular lady had a fabulous personality and knew everybody's name and had a connection with them. So be open-minded to learning new things and not being stuck in the past, because it is that whole mindfulness thing. It's trying to be with the person in the moment. And for my mum, we were always a very tactile family, so I maintained that. I would give her a hand massage. She in turn gave me a hand massage back. So there were the moments of absolute gold that I remembered, and the good bits I would try to repeat more and more. So 9 times out of 10, I would say I left feeling good, because I had had a really good time with my mum and my dad when he moved into the care home as well. But she would be in the big lounge, because they didn't have enough staff to do one-to-one and all of the stuff, the person-centred work that I've been involved in for such a long time. So I used to make a point of going in and being very, charming and polite, and I got to know some of the other residents really well and some of the staff really well. But I learned to go to my mum's room with her, to take her away from the noisy big television that often had Big Brother playing, So I would often go in, well, always, as it turned out, go into my mum's bedroom with her, and we had developed a playlist of all her favourite songs and hymns, because her faith was very important to her. And sometimes I would just support her. I would lift her from her wheelchair up onto her bed, and I would lie beside her. You couldn't do that in the lounge.
And I think it's important to remember you can do things like this.
Totally,
Still
you
your
can.
mum.
Totally.
That's her home. Whether she be in her own home or a residential.
Yep.
You do what you feel you would want to do as a daughter, wherever you are.
And actually, just when you say that, another thing that was really important to me in the early stages of my mum's Alzheimer's, when she was in a care home, my mum has always loved a bath with lots of lavender bubbles. Now, when she had a bath, sometimes she had been up and dressed and had her breakfast, and then because there was enough staff on, would be undressed. And staff were having conversations about Coronation Street, and they were really good members of staff, don't get me wrong, but they weren't focusing. I needed them, and that was me and my coping. I needed them to focus on my mum. So what I would do was I learned not to ask for permission because it was my mum. And what I would do is I would bundle her into my car, and I didn't live too far away from the care home, so I would fill a lavender bubble bath, and I would have to help her into the bath. And there was a whole thing about dignity and respect. I had never seen my mother naked. I had such respect for her, but I knew this bath was something that was important to her, so I got lots of fluffy towels, and I would close the door and I would say, I'm just outside, and I would hear her singing in the bath, or not. She would just be silent, but I would always hear her going, ah. So she would soak until she was like a prune, but she loved, that was her time and her space. So things like that, if ask questions, try to develop a picture of what's important to the person. For my mum, having a soak in the bath would absolutely be up at the top of her list, but there was no facilities.
No.
And it's not always possible to go and, pick a loved one up and take them out, because you might have other responsibilities.
But it might be.
But it might be.
It might be. Yes. It's not something to completely dismiss.
Totally not.
Yeah, even if you're going round to the favourite coffee shop for a wee cup of tea.
We knew every coffee shop in Glasgow.
Yeah.
Every single one, because we needed to get her out.
Yeah.
I have seen some family members watching other family members' visits, and I think sometimes it's evoked a sense of guilt.
They think they're doing it better than...
They think they are, and they're comparing themselves. Try not to compare yourself. The reality is there might not have been a really close relationship before your loved one has moved into the care home, and you're trying extra hard to make it a good relationship. But that's an alien thing to both of you potentially. So do not give yourself a hard time. Try and talk that out, because I think that lots of people carry so much guilt, and they might have regrets following a loved one's diagnosis about the things they should have done or wanted to do, and it's too late. It's not too late, but try not to give yourself a hard time. Try to do that self-care thing, but get it out your system. Don't gulp it all down, because I did. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody.
No, that's really excellent advice.
I remember one man, a really tall man, when I went to visit one night, was crawling along the corridor on his hands and knees. And I remember hearing somebody saying, oh my God, what's he doing? And I remember just having a conversation after that visit to ask what this man used to do for a living. And he had been an architect. And to my mind, he was measuring.
Yes.
And there's that whole thing about, the sundowning,
Yes.
Is it around tea time where the mother was busy cooking dinner, the kids were coming home from school? Was a man a minor? Did he have to get up at 4 o'clock? So did he wake in at 4 o'clock, put his clothes on? There's a reason behind every piece of behaviour.
Behaviour is communication.
Behaviour's communication. Every single time. And it's just sometimes trying to slow down and think and observe and wonder, get curious about why the person is doing the things that they're doing, because that can be a revelation in itself, and it can evoke different conversations. And when my mum stopped using words to communicate, I would still ask her questions, because I had that close connection with her. But sometimes I think people are fearful of asking questions. If you don't get an answer, you don't get an answer.
Yeah.
you're still connecting.
Yes, yes. And I think it's quite well known as well that even though the person that you're visiting may not remember what you did or the conversations that you had once you've left, the feelings that you evoke in them can last for the rest of the day and onwards. So if you make them smile, if you have a lovely hug, or you share a piece of music that makes you feel good, that's a long-lasting effect.
And my mum always had a chocolate drawer.
So women after my own heart.
We always shared chocolate, and you know, it would be everywhere, and we would laugh, and that's the thing. You go away feeling good, hoping, knowing that your loved one possibly is feeling the same way. I believe 100% that people, I think, living with dementia have stuff to teach us. Yeah. So it's not always about you visiting them, it's about what they still need and want to give back to you. And my mum was just the most gentle soul, and people commented on her all the time. Kitty is just gentle, and she gave me a hug. And my mum, sometimes, she was always a really jovial, happy woman. It was just in her genes. And sometimes her laugh would make other people laugh. And that sounds such a simple, trite thing to say, but there was huge power in it. So when you recognise the gifts that people still have.
Absolutely fascinating, Caroline. I think we should get together again at some other point, because I think you've got so much information and knowledge to share and passion. So thank you for sharing your personal experiences. I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of people out there. But thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks for watching. All the information to go with this film is in the notes below. Just click on the little arrow or the show more just under the picture. I'd love you to leave comments, and if you'd like to see more of these films, don't forget to hit the red subscribe button.